John Nash was not born into fame or privilege. He arrived in the world in a small American town in the middle of the 20th century, a quiet and intensely curious child. From an early age, he preferred puzzles to playgrounds, symbols to small talk. While other kids traded jokes, Nash played with numbers and patterns, as if the world itself were a code waiting to be cracked. At school, his teachers quickly realized that ordinary lessons could not contain him. He would skip steps in algebra, jumping straight to the answer in ways no one else could explain. He cared less about what the textbooks said and more about why the rules worked at all. This habit of asking deeper questions would define his entire life. When Nash entered university, he walked into a world buzzing with new ideas in mathematics, physics, and economics. But even in that environment, he stood out. He was brilliant, proud, and sometimes painfully blunt. One of his professors famously wrote in a recommendation letter that Nash was a mathematical genius. The statement was not flattery, it was a warning. Here was a mind that did not accept limits. At the graduate level, students normally spend years working on their thesis. They pick a narrow question and dig into it slowly, carefully, step by step. Nash did something different. In his mid-20s, he wrote a short dissertation, just a few dozen pages long, that would change how we think about strategy, economics, and even everyday life. At the time, most economic models assumed something unreal. They imagined a central planner, or an invisible auctioneer, or perfectly rational agents that somehow coordinate instantly. Real life is messier than that. Real people make decisions in the dark, with incomplete information, while others are also trying to win. Nash wanted a mathematics of conflict and cooperation that actually reflected this. He asked a simple question. In a situation where several decision-makers are interacting, each with their own interests, what does it mean for the situation to be stable? If each person chooses a strategy and no one can improve their payoff by changing their strategy alone, then the situation is at a kind of balance. Nash showed that under quite general conditions, such a balance always exists. Later, the world would call this the Nash equilibrium. The idea sounds abstract, but it is powerful. Imagine two companies setting prices, each trying to undercut the other. Imagine countries deciding whether to arm or disarm. Imagine drivers choosing lanes on a crowded highway, or students deciding how hard to study when grades are curved. In all these games, everyone adjusts their behavior based on what they expect others to do. A Nash equilibrium is the point where expectations and actions lock into place. Sometimes this equilibrium is efficient. Everyone gets a good result. But often it is not. The most famous example is the prisoner's dilemma, a scenario where two suspects must independently choose to stay silent or betray the other. From the perspective of pure self-interest, betrayal is the dominant strategy, leading both to a worse outcome than if they had cooperated. Nash's framework made it clear that rational individual choices can produce irrational group results. This simple insight quietly demolished the old belief that markets automatically turn self-interest into the best collective outcome. It did not say markets never work. Instead, it gave us a language to describe when they work, when they fail, and why. Economists began using Nash equilibrium to study everything from auction design and traffic patterns to political negotiations and online platforms. Mathematicians admired the beauty of his proof. Economists admired the usefulness of his concept. But Nash saw game theory as only one part of his work. He was also drawn to pure mathematics, chasing elegant abstractions in geometry and analysis. To him, success was not measured by money but by originality. He wanted to have ideas that no one else could have had. Yet genius came with a cost. As a young man, Nash was socially awkward and often arrogant. He could be cutting in conversation, dismissing other people's work with a few sharp words. Colleagues respected his mind, but sometimes avoided his company. The same intensity that drove his creativity also isolated him. In his early 30s, something in Nash's inner world began to crack. He experienced episodes where his thoughts slid away from reality. He started seeing patterns and messages that were not there, assigning secret meanings to ordinary events. The brilliant logician who once dissected strategic behavior with cold clarity began to lose his grip on what was real and what was imagined. Doctors diagnosed him with a serious mental illness. For long periods, he moved in and out of hospitals and treatment. His academic career collapsed. He lost his positions, his income, his status in the mathematical community. To many observers, it looked as if a once shining star had burned out forever. Yet the story did not end there. Over the years, with support from family, medical care, and his own stubborn will, Nash gradually found a way to live with his condition. The symptoms did not disappear overnight, but he learned to distrust his most vivid delusions and to anchor himself in shared reality. It was not a dramatic cure, but a slow, disciplined return to clarity. All this time, his early work in game theory was quietly spreading through the world. In economics, game theory became a central tool. In evolutionary biology, researchers used Nash equilibrium to model how strategies spread in populations of animals and organisms. In computer science, it influenced algorithms and network design. In everyday vocabulary, phrases like Nash equilibrium and game theory moved from journals into newspapers, business books, and even movies. In 1994, more than 40 years after he wrote his short dissertation, John Nash was awarded the Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences, together with two other researchers in game theory. The Nobel Committee recognized that his concept of equilibrium had transformed our understanding of strategic interaction. For the first time, a mathematician whose main work was in abstract logic and geometry was honored at the highest level of economics. For Nash personally, the prize was more than money or fame. It was a public acknowledgement that his creative self, the part that had been buried under years of illness, still mattered to the world. He returned to the academic stage, giving lectures, answering questions and reflecting on his own journey with a quiet, sometimes fragile humility. The power of Nash's story lies not only in the mathematics, but in the human arc. A shy child who loved puzzles grows into a brilliant but difficult young man. He opens a new field with a short, almost deceptively simple thesis. He falls into deep mental darkness, loses almost everything, and slowly climbs back towards stability. In the end, he sees his work transform how people think about competition, cooperation, and rationality itself. Game theory does not tell us what we should value. It does not decide what is fair or moral, but it gives us a lens to see the hidden structure of incentives around us. When we negotiate salaries, set prices, vote in elections, invest in markets, or choose how much effort to put into a shared project, we are playing games in the Nash sense. We act based on what we expect others to do, and they do the same. Sometimes the equilibrium of these games leads to good outcomes, like fair agreements and efficient markets. Other times it traps us in bad patterns, like arms races, traffic jams, or races to the bottom in wages and working conditions. Understanding Nash's ideas does not magically solve these problems, but it helps us design better rules, contracts, and institutions that push behavior toward better equilibria. Today, when economists design an auction for radio spectrum, when internet companies think about platform incentives, when climate negotiators try to prevent free riding, they are walking along paths that Nash helped to open. Behind the technical formulas is a simple question he forced us to face. What happens when every player pursues their own best response, and is that outcome good for everyone? John Nash's life reminds us that extremely powerful minds can be fragile, that creativity and vulnerability often live close together. It also shows that even very abstract ideas can reshape the concrete world of money, markets, and human choices. From a thin dissertation of about 28 pages came a framework that underpins whole branches of modern economics and beyond. In the end, Nash's legacy is twofold. He gave us a precise language for strategic thinking, one that reaches far beyond economics into politics, biology, and everyday life. And he gave us a human story about resilience, about a person who fell very far and yet managed to return cautiously but bravely to the world of ideas. When you hear the phrase Nash equilibrium, it is easy to picture only equations on a board. But behind those symbols stands a full human life, with brilliance, pride, struggle, recovery, and impact. Understanding that life can change how we think about genius, about mental health, and about the strange games we all play with one another every day.